Welcome to this episode of Inside Legal ESG. My name is Pam Cohn, and I'm delighted to serve as the host for this podcast series. Today, our guest is Robert van Beemen, a partner at DRB Groep in the Netherlands, and he also serves as the co-chair of the subcommittee ESG of the Law Practice Management Committee of the International Bar Association. That's a mouthful. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you for having me on this podcast.
So my first question is, tell me about DRB Groep, what they do, and what your role there is.
Yeah, DRB Groep, originally it's an executive search firm for the legal sector, so law firms and legal corporate legal departments, with a strong focus on in the Netherlands. But it has been transformed into rather a broader consulting firm for the legal sector. So we still do a lot of executive search for law firms and corporate legal departments, but we have a very strong leadership development practice group. And I think now for 2.5 years, with me on board and as one of the partners, a strategy practice group. So where we advise mainly law firms, ranging from high-end boutique firms to mid-market firms, international firms on their more strategic challenges and priorities. And that's my responsibility and role.
And so I'm curious, in your executive search area as well as in the strategy area, are you seeing an increased focus on finding ESG people or setting ESG strategies amongst your clients?
So what you see is that, and that's in the Netherlands, that's in the Benelux, that's in Europe, and also when I talk to my international clients or relations within the IBA internationally, finding, recruiting, retaining, motivating talent has become one of the most, the biggest challenge for many firms. And it's kind of a zero-sum game. So if one firm hires a partner or a team, it almost by definition means the loss of a partner or a team from another firm. In that sense, it has become very important for firms to get your things in place, to get your household in order. ESG has become one of the, as I see it, has become one of the strategic pillars in getting your own house in order. Same with some other strategic priorities, but in that sense, it has become very important. So what you see is that talent. So when I started my career as a lawyer in the Dutch Caribbean, in Curacao, in the tropics. At that time, and you were raised as a lawyer to work for your client, and you are not your client. You were just representing your client, whether it was in a transaction or in a litigation. Nowadays, it has become more and more important for whom you work, the type of client, the type of work a client is doing, the type of activities your client is doing. And there is a new generation of talent who have difficulties to work for certain type of clients who perform certain type of activities, like the tobacco industry or the oil and gas industry. And you can ignore that as a firm, as an individual partner, but it will follow you somehow, because if you keep on working for that tobacco company, and I have many examples from my own advising consulting practice, talent refuses to work for those type of clients. So you really need to work on that. And what we do is that we advise our clients on that, and we advise them, listen, if you want to. So many law firms have a growth strategy. They want to grow. They either want to expand, and but you need to have your desired market positioning and your strategy, your strategic priorities in place. If you do not have them in place, it will become harder and more difficult to hire the right talent.
So let me elaborate a little bit on that with
Yeah.
respect to the younger generations and working or not working for certain clients. Does it matter to the younger generation the type of work you're doing for that sector? So, for instance, if my law firm were to have a strategy that is to help the oil and gas companies transition to greener sources, does that make a difference rather than defending the status quo? And I'm sorry for the construction noise that's coming from my upstairs apartment. I will mute myself while you answer.
That's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. Yeah. So, and what I see is that when I started advising and law firms on ESG and the impact of all those developments on the strategy, desired market positioning of law firms to organization, I think about 3-4 years ago, it was many firms, many partners thought it was kind of a black and white decision. You work for the oil and gas industry or not. But what you now see is that their thinking have become more developed, more mature in that sense, and that many firms and talent associates, partners, they now see there's a difference between the type of work you can do for them. And I think that brings an additional nuance in the discussion. Yeah.
Well, and indeed, oil and gas companies, for an example, are going to need a lot of legal help to face what they are facing in the next generation.
Yeah.
Tell me about your role as the ESG co-chair for the subcommittee for the IBA.
Now, first of all, Pam, you're one of the members of the subcommittee, and yeah, it's now. I think this subcommittee now exists for 2 years, so it's also recognized by the IBA, by the Law Firm Management Committee, that ESG has become a strategic pillar for many firms and for law firm management in itself. So indeed, I'm one of the co-chairs together with Zulon Begum, and the law firm, the ESG subcommittee focuses on or wants to provide a platform for law firm leaders, external ESG consultants, focusing on the legal sector, and providing a platform where we can share insights, knowledge on ESG and the rapid developments with regard to ESG that have a strong impact on law firms and their strategy, their market positioning, their organization, their governance model, and all what it means for them. So that's and I think we now exist for 2 years. Our first priority was to get a wide range of professionals on board, members, in terms of gender, in terms of continents, geographies, in terms of expertise. I think we kind of managed to get there. Now, yeah, 2025 just started, working on the new plans. But given also the importance ESG has within the broader IBA, I think we are well placed and doing a pretty good job for a relatively new committee within the IBA.
And you mentioned that it is a major pillar for the IBA and for many law firms. And I know that one of the initiatives we undertook in 2024 was a survey of where are law firms on their ESG engagement, let's call it. Tell us about the results.
Yeah, so it was the third consecutive survey we did. The first one was when we were still an ESG working group within the Law Firm Management Committee. The second and the third survey were done when we were actually a subcommittee. And we focused on ESG initiatives, goals, actions, priorities taken, adopted by law firms. So, and that could relate to the work they do for clients. That could relate to their own organization, to ESG activities with regard to their talent. And what you see is that I think almost every firm. So it was a global survey with a strong focus, respondents from Europe, but at the end it was rather it was a global survey. I think there's almost every firm at least says they have kind of an ESG strategy, ESG activities. Now in 2024, most firms have, let's say, done their low-hanging fruit. Whether you can, but I don't want to have a dogmatic discussion here, whether you really, I think you can have but you can have a discussion whether it's really strategy. But most firms at least do have some ideas, some policies on ESG. But I think it relates to the business model, to the traditional business model of firms. They have difficulties to really integrate ESG into their strategy. It's hardly integrated in the governance model. So at the end, they have a strategy, they have adopted certain policies, but partners are not. It's not part of the performance management review of partners, for example, let alone of associates. So I think there is still some room for improvement. And what we see, and it's also from my own practice, that a lot of firms still find it difficult to have an open discussion in their own partnership, but also with the associates, for whom do we work and for whom do we do not work. In terms of ESG. So when it comes down to clients who do not want or cannot pay the fees, it's clear. It's been clear for a long time. But since a couple of years, ESG has become an additional layer of complexity in client and matter intake. And for many firms, and that's also what you see from the survey, for many firms, it's rather difficult to have that discussion and to have a proper structure in place where you where you have that discussion on client and matter intake. Yeah.
And I think that's particularly true because of the way law firms are structured, as you mentioned. It's a partnership, and everybody in the partnership has a different idea of what's a priority and what's not. But I think it's been complicated even further with the politicization of ESG, particularly in the United States, where ESG is seen as something woke rather than a strategic way of managing your business risk and setting strategy for the future. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Although you see a serious backlash in Europe on ESG now too, with some far radical right political parties in government. Whether that's the same in law firms, I doubt. I think a difference with the Benelux European legal market is that, let me put it otherwise, in the US, there are many firms who, to more or lesser extent, have strong ties with either Republican or the Democratic Party. In the Benelux, in Europe, we don't see that in that that much. So there, at least for now, we don't see it. But what I see, for example, I witnessed a couple of times heavy discussions within a partnership, partners working for tobacco companies, associates refusing to work for those tobacco companies, but partners at the end of the year, they still have to make their revenues and their contribution to the profit. And if a tobacco company is one of your bigger clients, then you have to make, not only as an individual partner, but also as a partnership, as a firm, you have to make a concession to that stream of revenues. And what's next? So we can now refuse to work for a tobacco company. Who's next? So that's what I see, and also, but that also has become a discussion, both in the Netherlands but also within the IBA. There's also something as the rule of law, where every party, every client has the right on legal assistance. And I know, as you always say, Pam, but it doesn't mean it have to be you. But I see that either it's the national bars, the international bar, law firms, they are really struggling with that. Where does it end? And I don't have the question, and I don't say firms should stop working for the tobacco industry or should stop working for the oil and gas industry. But at least think about it, talk about it within your partnership, and come up with a structure where you can have these discussions either within your partnership, with your associates, because otherwise you will have these type of discussions for every new client, every new matter that comes in, and it will become an ad hoc discussion. And at the end, as one of I recently had an interview together with one of the managing partners of one of the bigger firms here in the Netherlands. You're also working from an associate perspective. You're also working, if you work for the bigger commercial big law, you work for certain type of clients and you do certain type of work, and it comes up and it comes with a certain salary, and you want to go on your annual ski trip to the Alps, and you want to have your Christmas party in a fancy restaurant and hotel. So it that's what many also what many partners tell me after when I have given a keynote speech or whatever, and then they come to me and say, "Yeah, and I agree with you, Robert, but we struggle with this. We really struggle with this because they come to my desk telling me that they don't want to work for ABC or we should work for, but at the same time they want to make a serious salary and all the benefits that comes with it."
It's so true that if a firm decides to no longer work for a particular sector, they have to make that up somehow if they want to continue providing, the things that you mentioned. And that's why I too am not a fan of blacklisting any particular sector, but rather what can we as a profession do to ensure the viability in a more sustainable, equitable way of and healthy way of some of these industries that we've been discussing.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, tell me, in your role as the IBA co-chair of the ESG subcommittee and also in your work through DRB Group, tell me what do you feel are going to be the hottest trends in the ESG space for 2025?
I think um, and it's not particular just for 2025. I think it was already 24, but we really come from the questions what and why is ESG to how. Um, so this year, 2025, the CSRD, the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, it's already in place, but now it has become effective for even a bigger number of companies. So under the CSRD, they have to companies are required to provide detailed ESG disclosures, and in 2026, another group of type of companies fall under the CSRD, and the first reports will need to be published this year. So I think that's something we should keep a close eye on. The deadline for the climate, the Paris Climate Agreement is getting closer. I think what you see is that either it's the market investors, other stakeholders, they do not accept any longer the zero net pledges. They really want to see now, okay, what are your goals and how are you going to do it? So stop saying that you have all kinds of pledges. What are you going to do and how are you going to do it? I think technology, AI, has become it's getting faster. And I think that anyone could expect, but that has become in several ways is getting important. One way, data management. To report on your ESG performance, you need to have your data in place. Data management technology, AI, it's getting pretty important. On the other hand, there are serious concerns about the environmental impact of technology and AI. So the more firms adopt all kind of technology and AI tools, but it has serious implications on at the same time, on your carbon footprint. Another thing, and it already kind of started in 2024, sorry, but it is the ESG backlash we see. About 2 years ago, when I started giving keynote speeches, and I mentioned it was one of my last footnotes in my keynote, and I said something about the ESG backlash. So certain states in the US, but now you see it, and I said, "No, I'm not sure whether we will in Europe we will face it." Now you see, I'm not a visionary because 2 years later we also see it in Europe, and there I think we're facing a divergence of some ESG regulation, whether it's in the US on national and state level, in Europe, Asia. Very, very curious what is going to happen there and how. I'm sure we will talk about it in a minute in more detail. But yeah, I think so. I think that's in a nutshell what we will see.
And that leads, and again, excuse the construction noise from upstairs. That leads into my next question, which is, if we talk again 1 year from now, what will be different? What will have changed in the next 12 months?
Tighter regulation, more regulation. So I think that's one of the things that the CSRD, for example, in 2026 will be in full force, applying to all the companies that fall under the requirements of the CSRD. That's one thing. I think we see, because of tighter regulation, like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, but also the EU taxonomy, and related to that, the greenwashing challenges from many firms. I think we will see more litigation, disputes. That's one thing. I think what we will see is that ESG with an even broader group of companies has become just a strategic pillar. And I'm not sure whether we're getting there in 2026, but I really hope we can get it on the agenda of the board instead of the people of marketing and communication. It's also about communication and marketing, but at the end, it starts with it's a strategic pillar.
Or it should be.
Or at least it should be. Yeah.
So given all the challenges we've been discussing, in my last question, tell me, despite all those challenges, what gives you hope?
That I really think that if you see what we as a humankind have reached over the last 2, 3, 4 years, it's it's not going away. And I know there in a lot of academic papers, there's a lot of discussion whether we should still call it ESG or give it another term. It's not going away. It's and whether it's on the agenda of many boards, it has become an indispensable element of companies' policies, strategies, communication products, pledges. It has become an indispensable element of what they do, who they are. That's not going away. Um, so that it's not going away. I think that so I think that's good. Pam, you and I, we recently had a discussion, and also given the current political situation in the US, and we had a discussion on that and the meaning of ESG. And then you said something interesting, which by then I kind of knew it, but I didn't realize it. Many companies in the US, if they want to have access to the European market, they need to have their ESG policies, reporting requirements in place. So whether they communicate it very actively in the US, in their home market, they still need to work on this to get access to the European market. So what gives me hope is that there are a lot of initiatives from the private practice, public authorities, governments, to get this in place, to get ESG in place. Yesterday, there was an interesting article that biodiversity will be the next big thing that companies, next to climate, and that biodiversity linked to the Montreal Agreement, will be the big thing that corporates will implement in their strategy, in their supply chain, in the impact they have on what they do. So despite all the rhetorics and the ESG backlash, I'm still hopeful.
And I completely agree with you that this work isn't going to stop. It may eventually be called something else, but for businesses to assess their risks under the ESG framework just makes good business sense. And I don't care what you call it, right? I don't care what you call it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time today and your insights. I'm sure our listeners have really enjoyed it. You and I are going to have the privilege of working together on a Legal ESG Benelux event, which will be scheduled for September of 2025. So our listeners should keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much, Robert. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you, Pam.